Somebody called me 3 weeks ago and told me not to say what I am about to say in this video. Not a stranger, someone I have known for decades, someone whose opinion I respect deeply, and the reason they gave me for staying silent was not that what I want to say is wrong. They did not dispute a single fact. The reason they gave me was this: Ray, if you say this publicly right now, you are going to cause panic among people who are not equipped to handle what comes after the panic. And I sat with that for 3 weeks. I genuinely sat with it. I thought about it at 6 in the morning, and I thought about it at midnight, and I kept coming back to the same question that I could not answer in a way that let me stay silent. Who decided that ordinary Americans are not equipped to handle the truth about what is happening to their money? Who made that decision? And why are the same people telling me to stay silent making completely different decisions with their own money right now, quietly and without announcement? That is the question that made me pick up the phone and call my team and say I am recording this video today, regardless of who told me not to. Because the gap between what the most powerful people in finance know and what most ordinary Americans are being told is no longer a gap I can justify staying silent about. And I want to spend every second of this video closing that gap completely. Stay with me, because what I am about to say was not supposed to be said publicly, and every single minute of it is directly relevant to your money, your savings, your family, and the decisions you need to make right now before the window that is still open today closes. I need you to do something right now before I say another word. I need you to think about one specific moment in the last 6 months. One specific moment when you looked at a number, a grocery bill, a rent payment, an insurance renewal, a utility statement, and felt something that was not quite surprise and not quite anger, but something between the two. A feeling of "this does not make sense." A feeling that the rules you understood about how hard work and saving and doing everything right were supposed to add up are somehow not adding up anymore the way they used to. I need you to hold that feeling right now, because that feeling is not a personal failure. That feeling is not bad luck. That feeling is the most important financial signal most Americans are receiving right now. And almost nobody is explaining to them what it actually means, what it is actually telling them, and why the people who understand exactly what it means are the people who are quietest about explaining it. That feeling is the thing I was told not to talk about. And I am going to explain it completely before this video is over. Let me tell you what happened to me in 1982, because I have told this story before, but I have never told it the way I need to tell it right now. In 1982, I was sitting alone in an empty office with no income. I had made the most public and catastrophic professional mistake of my career. I had predicted a financial collapse with complete certainty, and I was completely wrong. I had to pick up the phone and call my father and ask him to lend me $4,000 to pay my family's bills. My wife was depending on me. My 2 young children were depending on me. And I had nothing. And I remember sitting in that office and feeling something I had never felt before in my professional life, which was the specific and terrible shame of a man who understood the system well enough to be certain and was wrong anyway. But here is the thing about that moment that I have never said publicly before today. The worst part of sitting in that empty office in 1982 was not the financial loss. The worst part was understanding that I had been silent about my doubts for months before the collapse of my prediction. I had sat in rooms with people I respected and heard things that made me uncertain, and I had stayed silent because the personal cost of admitting uncertainty felt too high, and that silence, not the wrong prediction. That silence is what I have never forgiven myself for, because the people around me deserved my honest uncertainty more than they deserved my confident silence. I am recording this video today because I refuse to make that mistake again. I refuse to be silent about what I know because someone whose opinion I respect told me the timing is not right. The timing is never right to tell people something that costs them comfort to hear. But the cost of not telling them is always higher. Here is what I know and what I was told not to say. I know that the people who understand the American financial system most deeply, the people who manage the largest pools of capital in the world, the people who sit in the rooms where the real conversations happen, those people are making decisions with their own money right now that directly contradict the advice most of them are giving publicly. I told the Financial Times this directly. I said most people are silent right now because they are afraid of retaliation if they speak, and when I said that I was not describing cowardice, I was describing a rational calculation that the personal cost of honesty exceeds the professional benefit of making it. What I did not say to the Financial Times, but what I am saying to you right now, is that the silence of the people who know the most is the loudest possible signal available to ordinary Americans about the severity of what is actually happening. When the doctors stop talking in the hallway and start moving quickly toward the room, you do not need to hear what they are saying to understand that something has changed. The silence is the message. And I want to show you right now exactly what the silent people are doing with their own money while they stay quiet publicly, because actions are always more honest than words. Central banks around the world, the institutions that understand currency risk better than any other institution on earth, bought gold at the fastest rate in 50 years in 2024 and 2025 simultaneously. They did not announce this as a strategic shift. They did not hold press conferences. They quietly and consistently reduced their holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds and increased their holdings of gold month after month, while publicly maintaining confidence in the dollar. Gold rose 65% in 2025. Not because individual investors suddenly decided they loved gold, because the institutions that hold the world's reserves decided quietly and without announcement that they wanted less of what the dollar represents and more of what gold represents. That is the silent people acting. And the gap between what those institutions are doing with their own balance sheets and what they are telling ordinary investors to do with their savings is the gap I was told not to describe publicly. I want to give you the number that sits at the center of everything I have just said, because I think numbers are more honest than narratives. And this number is the most important financial fact most Americans have never been shown directly. Since 1971, the purchasing power of $1 has fallen by 92%. $1 today buys what 8 cents bought in 1971. That loss of 92 cents of every dollar happened without a single dramatic event that most Americans would identify as a theft. It happened through the slow and systematic mechanism of a government resolving its debt obligations by reducing the value of the currency those obligations are denominated in. And here is what makes that number not a historical curiosity, but a present emergency. The mechanism that produced that 92% loss over 55 years is running right now at the fastest pace since it began. The dollar fell 10.8% in the first half of 2025 alone, the worst 6-month performance since 1973. And the people who understand this mechanism most clearly are the people who are publicly saying the least about it right now. I know because I am one of them, or I was, until 3 weeks ago when I decided I could not justify the silence anymore. Now I want to show you the 5 things the silent people know, and I want to give you each one not as a financial briefing, but as the confession it actually is. Because each of these 5 things is something I have sat with privately and wrestled with publicly and decided today that the wrestling is over. The first confession is this: the Federal Reserve is trapped, and everyone who understands monetary policy already knows it. I said on live television on April 27th that we are certainly in a stagflationary period. Prices rising and the economy slowing simultaneously, and the Fed has no clean move available. Raise rates and you crush a weakening economy. Cut rates and you lose the credibility that is the only thing standing between the current situation and something significantly worse. I said publicly that cutting rates right now would cause the Fed to lose its credibility. What I did not say publicly is that every serious economist I have spoken with privately has already concluded the same thing, and none of them are saying it loudly, because saying it loudly changes the outcome in ways that are worse than saying nothing. The silence is protective of the system and destructive of the ordinary person who needs to understand what the system is actually facing right now. The second confession is this: the retirement accounts of most Americans are concentrated in assets that the most credible institutional forecasters in the world are projecting will deliver near zero real returns for the next decade. Goldman Sachs projects 3% annual returns from American stocks over the next 10 years. Vanguard projects 5%. The S&P 500 is trading at 35 times earnings, higher than at any point except the peak of the dot-com bubble in 2000. I know financial advisors who know these projections intimately and who have not mentioned them to a single client because the conversation that follows is one that cost them the relationship. The silence of financial advisors about the expected returns of the products they are selling is the most expensive silence in the lives of most ordinary Americans right now. The third confession is the one that I find personally hardest to say because it requires me to describe something that contradicts a promise that my generation made to the generation watching this video. The middle-class financial life that defined American prosperity, one income supporting a family home ownership in your 30s, retirement security in your 60s, is no longer structurally available to the majority of Americans, and the trajectory is moving away from availability, not toward it. Only 25% of American households can currently afford a median-priced home, down from 60% in 2005. That is not a housing market problem. That is the direct result of the mechanism I described earlier, running for 20 years against the purchasing power of ordinary American savings, while real asset prices rose to reflect the currency's declining value. The people who owned homes before the mechanism accelerated saw their net worth rise. The people who were saving to buy a home saw their savings lose purchasing power while the target price rose above them. And the people who understood this most clearly said the least about it publicly. The fourth confession is about what I personally did when I returned from my trip to Asia earlier this year, and I want to be more specific about this than I have been publicly before because I think specificity is the only form of honesty that is actually useful right now. When I returned from spending time with the investors and decision makers who are reshaping where the world's money flows, I made specific changes to my own positioning. I increased my gold allocation significantly. I said on Bloomberg television that currency values face real risk and that gold and diversification are what every investor needs right now. What I did not say on Bloomberg television is that the conviction behind that statement was higher after what I heard privately in Asia than anything I said publicly conveyed. The people I spoke with in Asia had already concluded things about the dollar's trajectory that most American investors have not yet begun to consider. And the gap between what those people had concluded and what most Americans currently believe is the gap that will define the financial outcomes of the next 5 years. The fifth confession is the hardest one, and it is the one I was most specifically told not to say publicly. The resolution of the debt situation that is already underway will be paid for by the people who are least prepared for it. This is not a political statement. It is a structural observation. The mechanism of resolving unsustainable government debt through currency debasement always transfers purchasing power from the people who hold their wealth in the currency being debased to the people who hold their wealth in assets that reprice upward as the currency loses value. The people who hold real assets are overwhelmingly in the top of the wealth distribution. The people who hold their wealth in savings accounts and dollar-denominated fixed income are overwhelmingly in the middle and bottom of the wealth distribution. The silent people know this. They know who pays. And the reason they are silent is not because they are evil. It is because they have already moved to the right side of the mechanism, and the act of describing it publicly accelerates a process they would rather manage quietly. I am describing it publicly because you deserve to know which side of it you are currently on and what to do about it right now while you still can. So here is exactly what to do, and I want to be more specific than I have ever been publicly, because vague advice is the refuge of people who are still trying to protect themselves from the consequences of honesty. The first thing is to move meaningful money into gold immediately, and I mean immediately, not eventually, between 15 and 20% of your total investable assets, not 5% as a hedge, as a core position. The institutions that understand currency risk better than anyone are buying gold at record rates while telling ordinary investors to hold diversified portfolios of stocks and bonds. The difference between what those institutions are doing and what they are recommending is the difference between the right side of the mechanism and the wrong side. GLD and IAU are accessible.